Well, as we had mentioned earlier, Treasury Secretary Jack Lew will be making the case for the president's budget today. He is set to testify in front of the House Ways and Means Committee. One of the Republicans who will question Lew today is Illinois Congressman Peter Roskam. He joins us now from Capitol Hill. Chief Washington correspondent Peter Cook is also back with us as well. So, Congressman Roskam, first off, what would you like to hear from the Treasury Secretary that might change your views on the budget and the president's proposals on tax reform?
I would love it if the Treasury Secretary came in and said, there's a new day and this could be great. We're going to take on the long-term debt questions. We see that there's an unprecedented opportunity with the Republican House and the Republican Senate to do things that we've never contemplated before, and we're ready to take that on. I'd love it if he said, we're going to take on the totality of reforming the entire tax code, and we're going to rein in the IRS and not give them an additional $2 billion. I'd love it.
Okay, you would love that, but Congressman, I have bad news for you. You're probably not going to hear something along those lines. So what is there, if there is anything in the president's budget that you could agree with?
Look, I think that the president generally discussing in broad terms about tax reform is a good thing. In other words, he's not defending the status quo, and neither are Republicans on Capitol Hill. There's a general recognition that the way we deal internationally on the tax side is a failure, and it's putting U.S. companies and U.S. workers at a disadvantage. There's some common ground there, and I'd hope to be able to build on that.
Let me pick up on that if I could, Congressman, because the president in his budget did put forward perhaps his most detailed plan to date. He put some numbers behind it, particularly in dealing with those offshore profits from U.S. companies. A 19% minimum tax on all foreign earnings going forward. That's better than just allowing companies to leave that money parked offshore. Can you support that?
Yeah. Look, that's fair enough, and I think that the general discussion about repatriation is something that is very robust and very dynamic, and I'm hopeful that we can get to somewhere positive with the administration. There's another point, and that is this money's not going to be sitting there offshore into perpetuity. European countries and others are beginning to make moves to try and attach those profits for themselves and make it a taxable event for the U.S. For U.S. companies to bring that back. So there's an urgency to this right now.
Go ahead, Peter.
If I just follow up on the trade-off here, the linkage that the president's trying to achieve, and your former colleague Dave Camp was trying to do the same last year, between infrastructure investment and corporate business tax reform. Is that a linkage that Republicans can support? In principle, doesn't that make some sense? Isn't that a useful way to try and get some money flowing towards infrastructure in this country?
It's a useful way to talk about it. I wouldn't presume to speak for all Republicans. The disadvantage of it, you stated the advantage. The disadvantage is that you give it up as a, quote, pay for overall tax reform. So the question is, do you take that now with an urgency to move forward, or do you save that as a pay for at a lower rates generally? And that's a debate that has to happen here on Capitol Hill.
Well, Congressman, I mean, do you applaud the president at all in any ways for at least saying, you know what, we've waited long enough on corporate tax reform. It doesn't look like we're any closer to an overhaul. So why don't we do something now for the country and bring some of that money back and invest it in infrastructure, which we badly need here in the United States?
Okay, the other side of that argument is what happens to the small companies that really are the framework for our economy that pay at the individual tax rate, the so-called pass-throughs, the LLCs, the S-corps, and so forth. If you do corporate tax reform and basically say to the next group, oh, we're going to get to you very, very soon, my prediction is you never get to them. They're pressing their nose up against the glass looking in, and we're at a real disadvantage. So our argument is if you're going to do C-corps, which we should, you should also do S-corps and not leave them behind.
But how do you know that, though, Congressman? How do you know that moving separately on big corporations, getting them to at least bring some of their money back or taxing them on that money, how do you know that that's going to leave small businesses out?
Well, there's no certainty this side of heaven, but let me just say my experience of serving for this number of years in the United States House of Representatives suggests to me that if you let a big part of a coalition go, then all of a sudden nobody else is going to be actively participating. So you're right, it's a judgment that I'm making, but my prediction is that it's true, that if C-corps go alone, you're not going to get the small business tax relief that we so desperately need.
Congressman, let me ask you about what's on the floor today. You guys have been pretty critical about this president putting forward a budget that is more political than anything else in nature. It's not going to go anywhere in this Republican-controlled Congress. You all are about to vote to repeal Obamacare for something like the 60th time. You know that's not going anywhere with this president as well. Aren't you all playing politics with this as well? Can't you be guilty as charged just the same?
You could make that claim, but remember, there's a number of members of Congress that have come in a huge wave election running against Obamacare, and they made a pledge to their constituents that they would do exactly what they're going to accomplish today, that is, vote to repeal it. You make a good point that the story can't end there, and now the work is on the House and the Senate to come up with a replacement. This is all going to be driven in part by the possibility of a Supreme Court decision that could put a body blow at the taxing structure of Obamacare, but then also, the majority leader has tasked 3 House committees now to come up with a replacement.
This year?
This year. It's for real. Here we go.
All right.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. Congressman Peter Roskam, and also to our chief Washington correspondent, Peter Cook, ahead of the